see. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is RSM Introduction for developers. So I'm glad that you're here. You may have heard this week there was some announcement around Holochain. I don't know exactly what was that about, but yeah, so RSM was announced. It's a new version of Holochain, almost like a rewrite from the ground up. And today we are going to do a little bit of a demo of an application in RSM, just so you get a little more comfortable. Okay, this is what has changed. This is what you have to keep in mind. And then I would like to explain conceptual changes that I think are important when you are trying to design for Holochain RSM, and then just open a Q&A. I think we are like a small enough crowd so that we can have a good discussion, and we actually know each other pretty well one way or another. So I think it's going to be a good time. And yeah, Ruta, if you have anything more to add.
Yeah, so thanks, Guillaume, for hosting this. One thing I wanted to say is that we're focusing right now currently only more on technical questions. If you do happen to have non-technical questions, I will leave the link in the chat so you can access and submit your questions there. It's going to be an AMA later on, so you can get your questions, non-technical questions, answered there. Not sure how many, I see people are more joining in, so if you get any questions, technical ones, keep them for the Q&A at the end. What do you say, Guillaume? Or should people kind of ask you once you go along if it's a burning question? I think
we could do that if it's related to the topic we are discussing. I think it can work.
Okay, so let's gauge it out, but leave the.
Okay, so thanks, Ruta. Before diving in, I want to do a couple check-ins. So if you don't have your webcam up, that's fine. You can write in the chat or whatever. But how familiar are you with Holochain in general? Like, this is, I don't know anything about it, and this is I am Art. Where's everyone at? Okay. And then how familiar are you with RSM? Have you read the material? Have you actually built stuff? This is first time hearing it. And this is, yeah, I have been building applications for 1 month, which is nobody, but. Right. Okay, good. So as I gather, pretty good understanding about Holochain in general, but medium to small understanding of RSM, which is perfect. So I'm going to be gathering feedback along the way so that I can just give the best presentation possible. Okay, so first of all, RSM. So this is the new repository of Holochain. RSM stands for Refactored State Model. So basically is a rewrite from the ground up in the sense that before everything, okay, let me do one thing before sharing the screen. Let me explain a little bit what RSM is about like this. I think it's better. So before, previous version of Holochain was based in a Redux architecture in which everything was recorded in events and processed in like a queue and then dispatched, something like that. And this caused a lot of errors, a lot of synchronization issues, and all of the past bug fixes that we have been seeing the past weeks, like, okay, there is a consistency issue between Sim2H and Core. There is something wrong in the way that Holofuel handles things. It was due in some part to this architecture based around events and Redux type stuff. So this version of Holochain, hi Rafi, thanks for joining, is architectured around workflows. What does that mean? Basically, everything is chopped down to little tasks, and those tasks can be executed in parallel. And this enables much more concurrency. This enables correctness, which means that if you shut down the conductor at any time, the conductor will resume the work when it's booted up again. This was not the case on the previous version. And all the tech stack has been rewritten so that everything is tuned to be more performant. So instead of TCP, it's using quick UDP. Instead of WASME, it's using WASMer. Instead of some cryptographic libraries that's I think knows about, because it's difficult to compile them on Mac, they are switching and trying to make that lean. So it's basically they have rethought all the tech stack to tune for performance, and you can see that from the very beginning because it's much faster. So that's the general idea of what RSM is. A little bit of where it's at. Basically, it's at the moment of, it's not released. So it has been announced, but that doesn't mean that it's ready. There are a couple of big gaps still that yeah, make us, we can say it's a release version. So basically these gaps are one, networking. So right now you cannot connect to conductors with each other. Two nodes cannot talk to each other right now. What you can do is kind of simulate this by using one conductor and then two agents in that conductor that talk to each other. So Ali is running DNA A, Bob running DNA A. And this way you can still develop and test your applications pretty good. So that's one big gap. One other big gap is the key store, which is managing private keys and so on, is still being finished. So largely that's still mock, but I think that's going to be implemented in the very near future. And the other big gap is tooling and documentation. So right now you have to keep in mind that if you want to dive into RSM right now, there are a couple of rough edges around tooling. Maybe you will have to configure things yourself that you didn't have to in the previous version. And the documentation is still a bit lacking, because it has just been the focus on, the focus has just been in developing. So that's, I think, a high-level overview of what is RSM and where we are at. How am I doing? Are there any questions at this point? It's my video not chopping up. Is everything okay? Yeah, okay, perfect. So now I am going to transition into showing a demo application, which I'll send you also a link for, but anyway, here it is. Let me make that big. Can you see my screen? Perfect. Oops. Okay. Okay, good. So this is Visual Studio Code. This is what I use to develop Holochain applications. So This is what a Holochain application looks like now, pretty similar to last version, but with a couple of differences. So first of all, yeah, okay. Let me dive into one of the zones code, and then we'll come back to how you compile it and how you test it. So here I have two zones, meeting rooms and bookings of meeting rooms. So this is a very small application in which you can create meeting rooms, and then you can book hours for those meeting rooms. So, okay, I'm going to do a meeting, so I need to have this meeting room booked. So this is a very small zone, and you can see just from the get-go that things are a bit different. So big differences in writing zones for now. So as Tats was saying, okay, so here we have the way that we define function calls. This HDK extern is telling Holochain, okay, this is something that from Holochain's side you have to call or you have to listen to. So if you define, I don't know, some function here, Holochain is not going to know anything about it. But once you do HDK extern, it's like, okay, this is this is a function that Holochain has to care about. So one of the important things here is that as everything has been tuned for performance, DNA core communication, so communication between DNA and core, which means passing in input variables, getting out output variables, and so on, has been optimized for performance. And the consequences of that is that you can only put one input parameter in your functions, and that input parameter has to derive from serialized bytes. So this is to replace JSON string in the previous version, and serialized bytes is just a way to make everything faster. This is using message pack underneath. It has a couple annoying implications for developers, which, for example, if I want to return a vector of meeting rooms, I have to define a struct, and then that struct derives the serialized bytes, and then I can return that. But things like that. Overall, I think the code is cleaner and shorter. Let me show you how you define an entry and how you do different HDK calls like you do normally in Holochain. So here we have our struct, which is a meeting room. It just has a name, description, and the owner. You can see that already some data structures have changed, at least of name. So we don't have address anymore. We have agent public key, which is the public key of the agent, and things like entry hash, header hash. So everything has been chopped up into their semantic meaning. Okay, if I want to make this struct an SDK, an entry basically, I can just say like this, okay, HDK with its ID, the visibility, and that's it. You don't have to do anything more, at least to define it. Okay, so this is much cleaner in the sense that you don't have to define a whole entry definition and then do validation and so on, at least here. And this is how you would create a meeting room. Oops, sorry. So basically, yeah, you can see here, create entry, substitute the old commit entry. And as that was saying, all the function calls in Holochain Redux, which were like HDK, commit, entry, and things like that, have been substituted by macros. And this, at least as far as I understand, is to allow more flexibility into what parameters you can pass into the functions. This stat set has the disadvantage of, okay, I don't know, like here I don't have IntelliSense or anything like that. What do I have to pass in? But what you can do is just control click, and then you can see it's a little bit cryptic, but you can see, okay, the input has to confer with the create and so on. But anyway, I think this is better seen in the documentation, which I will show you later. So, okay, you have things like create entry, commit entry was the substitute for last version. Create link is the substitute for link entry. So you can see that things have changed in form and in some way also in data structures, but the concepts are still the same. You still receive parameters, build the stack, commit the entry, and create links, for example, from an anchor. So the anchor still exists, entries are still the same, headers still exist, but are a little different. I'm going to talk about that next. But yeah, you can see that, for example, get all meeting rooms, which is, okay, get me all the meeting rooms committed in this application. It's just a get links call, and then from those links, I do a get. Okay, so I get the link brings the target hash, and then I have to go and fetch that target hash. So you can see in general, most of your applications, the applications that you have been building before, will be able to be migrated pretty seamlessly, apart from the applications that made an assumption which RSM does not longer hold, which I would say it's like 20%, 15% of the cases, so not very many of those. Okay, everything good until now? Can I keep going? Am I going too fast? How are you feeling? All good? Awesome. Okay, so I want to talk about one of the important changes that we can see in this version, which is the importance of headers. So headers have become quite more important in this new version. So, for example, create entry returns a header hash, not the entry hash. That's why I'm doing this here to get the entry hash. Doing gets, like for example here, doing gets you an element, and an element is a header plus the entry accompanying the header. So it will be the default to deal with headers along the way when you are committing and getting entries. Also, the headers now include a lot of the information that previously were stored in entries. So things like update entry, delete entry, links, and so on, before were entries by themselves, but in this case, they are not. They are all compacted into one, into the header, basically. So there are different types of headers, so that you don't have to publish another entry, another unnecessary entry in the DHT. So that's more performant. So you can see that the tuning has always been around performance, and I think it has paid off. Okay, and then things like validation are also interesting. Okay, I haven't talked about this. Okay, you see here that we are creating a link. Oops. Between the anchor and the meeting room. Okay, so we have defined the meeting room as an entry, and we are creating the link between the anchor address and the meeting room hash. In the previous version, we would have had to define a link here from the anchor to a meeting room with validation rules, blah, blah. In here, you don't have to. You don't have to declare link types. links are dynamically defined and can be basically, you can link from any entry to any entry without previously defining it. But how does validation look like then? So this is what it looks like in the case of links, okay? So let me first explain to you one more general thing, and then we'll drill down into this validate link. So you are seeing that various things around, well, you are seeing, this is the case, I don't have too many examples of this, but Holochain has this new grammar callback mechanism in which a lot of the functions that you define have this pattern. And this is telling Holochain, hey, you can call this from the outside. And if the name matches what Holochain expects, this will be like, oh, okay, this is the init callback for this zone. So I will call this whenever this zone is getting initialized. So here, the way that we define validation for links is just define this callback, which is like a reserved name or whatever. So this is not a function you can call from the outside. Rather, it's a callback that Holochain will call by the subconscious of Holochain when it needs to validate a link. So, okay, here this callback will be executed anytime a link is created in this zone, and you have base entry and target entry. And as usual, you can compare that with something at some timestamp or whatever. And from that, you can say whether it's valid, invalid, or there is a new option, which is, okay, not for links, sorry. There is a new option in entries, which is unmet dependencies, which I think it's a topic for later. It's more complicated. But we have more control over the underlying mechanisms. And this is a theme that also is lurking around in lots of these changes. So the mentality now is not so much to make developers' lives easier. So for example, in the latest Holochain, you would have some things like get entry follows the update chain of the entry. Update entry follows also the update of the entry, so that it simulates normal behavior from other architectures or whatnot. But in this case, it's like, no, we don't know exactly what your use case is. We don't know what the default behavior of Holochain would be. So we are going to give you more control over what we can do, and you can configure and run your functions however you like. So this is more responsibility on our part as app developers to develop the right mechanisms, because Holochain will not handle them underneath. Like there will be a couple of shortcuts implemented that way, but you can see that as a theme in various places. Like for example, links now accept a tag, a generic tag, which is, you can put anything in that tag. It's a vector of bytes. So if you want to put an entry or a complicated struct, you can do that. And this is, okay, we don't know exactly what should be in that tag for your use case, but in the future, we will offer you some helpers to, okay, define link type as a string and then link tag however you want. So in this case, you can see I had to do it myself, basically. So if I want to define a tag which is a string, I have to do this a little bit of work to make it into a vector of bytes, basically, things like that. Yeah, so that's a general thing which we have to keep in mind throughout our development. Also, notably, gets right now do not follow the update chain, nor do update entry. So if you update an entry, uh, if, for example, let's say I'm committing a meeting room and I update it, when I update the same meeting room the second time, it's not going to update the updated meeting room. So if we have meeting room A and we update it to meeting room B, and then we say, okay, update meeting room A to meeting room C. This is, in the previous version, what you will have is, okay, Holochain will figure out that meeting room A was updated to meeting room B, so now meeting room B will be updated to meeting room C. But in this case, that's not the case. In the Holochain RSM version, what you will have is meeting room A updated to meeting room B, and meeting room A updated to meeting room C, because this is what you told Holochain to do. You told Holochain to update meeting room A to meeting room C. If you wanted to update meeting room B, you have to explicitly say, okay, no, I'm going to update meeting room B. And this is actually okay now. So now you can update an entry multiple times and it's not a problem. What you have to provide in the future are things like, okay, if you want me to follow the update chain like we did in the latest version, you have to provide a callback to figure out which one of these updates we should follow. Should we follow B or should we follow C? And if you have touched on the topics of anchor first, data first as patterns for updating entries, I think those patterns are becoming obsolete, because in the future, there will be a way for this update here from meeting room B to C to propagate back to meeting room A, so that the latest update is accessible from the original entry. So we can basically forget about anchor first, data first pattern, unless you want to do it, but it will not be necessary. I'm saying this because this has been a big theme for the community and hackathons and meetings that we have been having. Okay, so I think I'm pretty good as far as demoing the application code goes. Okay, last thing here is how you define the entry definitions now. Pretty standard, nothing else going on here. There is this new path entry definition, which is part of core. I didn't have to define it, but it comes from core itself. And this is basically anchors evolved. And I think it's a topic for another time, but think of it as complicated anchors that can, they function as a tree of anchors. So you can basically concatenate multiple anchors together to form a bigger and more complex anchor to attach links to. As I said, topic for another time. Okay, so now I'm going to do, oops, sorry, no, I didn't want to do that. Oh, sorry, yeah, I did not explain a little bit how you do callbacks, but this is how validate entry looks like now. So you have a big validate for all your entries committed in your zone, and you can do things like, okay, if any entry is bigger than 1,000 bytes, it's too big, I'm not going to commit it, regardless of its type, regardless of its other mechanisms and so on. Or you can do things like, okay, I'm going to convert the entry. If this entry is a meeting room, its name cannot be over 20. So you can see here that all this serialization we had to do with JSON string is much more easy now. So meeting room try from and the entry, and we are done. There is also a way to define things like, okay, I'm just going to define how to validate a meeting room like this. So you don't have to do a big switch here. But I've tried it, and at this point it doesn't work. But I think it will in the near future. Okay, so now to how do we test it? How do we compile it? So first of all, there is this tutorial. We have Ruta. We have to find some way to send. No, okay, sorry. Here in the about the RSM technical discussion category, there is a bunch of very important links that if you go to the forum you will find. One of the important ones to get started is how to build a Holochain DNA. So right now, as I said, tooling is a little rough still, so you have to basically download the repository and install build from source. Once you have done that, I'm not going to do it because it takes a lot of time. Then you can just run these two commands here. So cargo build, this is actually standard Rust. There is not a lot of different things going on here. And then I'm going to cancel that because it's going to take a little while. I had already done it. And then you have this DNA util, which is generating at the end of the day this bookings.dna.jc, which is your DNA at the end. And then we can take a little look on the test, but it's standard triorama basically. Like you can see conductor calls like this. I think you have experience with working with triorama, so I don't have to delve into it so much. The one important difference is that we don't have a weight consistency. We have to put a little bit of sleeps between calls. I don't know if they'll change that in the future, but this is what we have right now. And then to run the test, we just go into the test folder and say npm test. So it takes a little while for triorama to boot up and to boot up the conductor and so on. But once that's done, it's very, very fast. Like I have seen improvements of one call lasting in the previous version of Holochain, maybe 20 minutes when, this is a little ridiculous, but I saw, when there were, the node was in a network with very a lot of nodes. But in this case, it was like 0.004 seconds or something like that. So it's like, depending on what you're doing, it's a big improvement. So you can see all the tests passed. This is standard triorama, nothing too different going on here. Last thing I'm going to touch before Q&A is, so right now we don't have documentation on the HDK up and running. What we need to do is do cargo doc open inside our DNA, and this will bring up this cargo standard documentation. And if we click on, yeah, it will present us with these various grades. If we click on HDK3, which is the HDK this is using, we can see all the documentation for the various calls that the HDK has now. They are, all the ones here are completed, but some of the other calls are still being worked on, and you can see the activity on the GitHub to just be following that. So for example, create entry. Okay, so this is an example of how I can do things. Perfect. And I think I'm done for the demo. I wanted to do some UI also to show you how to connect with the UI, but honestly, I didn't have time with everything that's going on this week. But it should be pretty similar to what we were doing. Instead of HC web client, we have now Conductor API, which I think it's better defined. But apart from that, we should be on the same page. So UI coding shouldn't change that much. And I think I'm done talking too much. I'm happy to hear questions and also delve into the reaction you want me to. So thanks for keeping up with this long explanation.
Thank you, Guillaume, for your presentation. So now we're open to questions. I saw some comments and questions in the chat. So feel free to ask and go back and forth and maybe, yeah, ask about the code. I also saw in the chat that Suya asked, how do we validate update entry and delete entry now? If you want to elaborate.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Who was that? We can try to answer that. Basically, with this new grammar, callback grammar that we have, you can do things like validate update, and you will get that will only execute on any update. And I think you also can do validate update on this entry. So it's much more, you define different functions, and then depending on how generic they are, they will be executed first this function and then this other function, but they will all execute if they are defined, basically. I think for deletes that's the same. Honestly, I haven't tried that, so I don't know the exact specifics, but I'm pretty certain that that's the case.
So if you want to validate a specific entry, the one you did a while ago wherein you did validate underscore and then I think it was meeting room. So that automatically, Holochain automatically knows that that's a validation for a meeting room. Yeah. So, okay. So how, where does Holochain figure that out from the name of the function of the callback? Like,
yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to say. So with this callback grammar, the name of the function is the most important thing. So if the name matches some pattern that Holochain has defined, then it will call the function once the time is right. So if you define a function that validate meeting room and the suffix, so meeting room, is equal to the entry ID, entry type ID, which, okay, let me just share very quickly, but here we defined a meeting room with ID meeting room. So now if you define a validate meeting room, this will match. But be careful, this will not match. You know what I mean? And this is the same with all the different callbacks that you will be able to define. Actually, we have, just so you have an idea, we have a list here. Yeah, things like Genesis in its zones, validate update blog post, right? So if we take this example, if I update a blog post, first this function, because it's a more specific, will be executed. Then this function will also be executed, and this function will be executed on the create. So this will be executed on the update, but update in itself is also a create entry. So this will be executed as well. So you can see you chop the behavior in different functions, and then they are called subsequently. And you can do things like post commit also, which are interesting. So you can say whatever the entry has been committed, index it in the indexing app I have, or something like that.
I see. So the post commit is kind of like a lifecycle callback for an entry, right?
Exactly.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Is that can we also do like post commit underscore for meeting room? Like, will that be recognized as a?
I don't know. Like right now, it's not for sure. Right now, post commit is not working. So different. Okay, let me. Here in the forum, I posted in the RSM technical discussion. I posted like current feature list. So you have like, okay, all the HDK features, and are they done? Are they in progress or post commit? The callback sys, it's not called yet, and different things like that, right? Because it's still on building. But in that case, I don't think that's going to be the case, because it's more of a it could be implemented. I don't know in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes. Still on the topic of updates.
Yeah.
So you said if meeting room A gets updated to meeting room B and updated to meeting room C, it's fine by Holochain. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So for example, at compile time, you don't receive a message how you have to specify it's updated to B or C.
No, not even on runtime. So on runtime, that's fine also. So Holochain now is attuned to handling an entry that has been updated multiple times, and that's fine. Because here is the mental model we are using now. So imagine I have a document in a DHT, Google Docs clone, and now the network has a partition. So there is, I don't know, some disconnects of the network, and now I'm in this partition and you are in this partition. So in both partitions, the same entry exists, and say that we both have permissions to update it. And I update it to this version and you update it to this version. And then the network merges. Which is the correct one? Like, no, there is no correct one. Both are correct by validation rules. So we have to hold both. And then if you want to say, okay, get me the latest version of this document, in the app, there is a little, okay, if I have two versions of the document, what should I do? And then you can code whatever you like in that.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. On that point, I think it's, and I think in the chat, it's also a question. The way that delete works has changed also. So it used to be that you had, once you deleted an entry, that entry entered the tombstone set, so it's dead forever. So you create meeting room A, you delete meeting room A, and that entry is deleted. If you create meeting room A, that entry stays deleted. That used to be the case, but now that's not the case anymore. The way it works is you create meeting room A, you delete meeting room B, and these both like get nullified, like plus, minus, okay, the entry is deleted. But if you create again the entry, okay, now there's one more create than delete, so the entry is alive. You know what I mean? It's like a reference count. If you delete the entry more times than the ones that have been created, is going to be deleted. Otherwise, it's going to be alive. And this has implications also on the way that you design your entries and your functions. As a practical point of view, as far as CRUD goes, I would advise do normal gets and updates. So don't bother using anchor patterns or anything like that. Just update the entries, get the latest entry, and oh no, sorry, you can update you can keep updating the original entry, and in the future we will have better tools that will be implemented on top of that for us to basically make it performant. So right now it's not going to be very performant, but that's all right because we are in development. Once core catches up, our code is going to work the same, but just performant. Any more questions?
If you still happen to have more questions, I'm just reposting the link for AMA that's happening on Tuesday on the 22nd. So you can ask anything regarding this topic.
Yes. If there are no more questions, like, do you have some, I would like to know a little bit from the outside, because I've been involved in RSM for some time. I would like to know from the outside coming into RSM, how does it feel? Does it feel like, okay, I have to rethink everything, or does it feel like it's better and it's more like your mental model is more aligned with what we have right now? Do any of you have any comments on that, coming from the old version to this one? Or is it just more difficult and more stuff to throw into your head? That you're
I think
thinking really,
we have,
really hard.
yeah, I think we have another question from Martin in the chat.
Yeah. Exactly. We still have anchors. Anchors actually now have become a special case of paths. So we saw the paths entry type. A path is, an anchor is basically a path of just 2 elements. So you can think of paths like in directory structures. So a path, you have home, Guillem, projects, or whatever, that's your Unix path. In Holochain now you have, for example, tweets, all tweets slash the timestamp slash the author or whatever, and that's a path. So the anchor is just a path with only 2 segments. So all tweets and the timestamp or whatever. And it's defined on core. It's not even external now. On core, you can define anchors. Okay, Eric is saying that seems cleaner in both architecture and developer API. Perfect. Yeah, actually, so they have used RSM also as an excuse to rethink the whole stack and say, okay, what can we do to make everything cleaner and more attuned to what we are optimizing for? And we are receiving the results of that. So right now, for example, I think it's quite a little bit faster to write applications in the current version than it was the last version. It's faster compilation times. Also, things like that have all been much better, I think. And I'm like, in general, I'm really excited about RSM because this is the first time that I see, okay, we can use this version of Holochain to build something real on top of it, and it will work awesome, performant, and real users will be able to use this. So I'm really excited to start building on this for real applications. Okay, so we are approaching, yeah. Any last thoughts, comments? No? Yeah, go.
Yeah, for me, it's pretty exciting to see this new version of Holochain based on from the perspective of performance and it just being faster and cleaner and leaner. As a developer, I'm still a little bit intimidated because I think it's good that Holochain provides us with more tools to build our applications flexibly to fit our use case more. Like um, validation right now, we can have like a sort of an overarching validate for all entries and have more granular validation for per entries. And for update, we have this sort of multivalent reality right now, but then on top of that, we have to build our own way of resolving multiple updates to same entries. And so on top of that, I think it's just that I think we have more responsibility in terms of designing our applications to fit our use case, but then that work I think will definitely pay off when in order for us to build a real, like performant distributed applications on top of Holochain. So overall, I'm very excited. The next few months will be more about learning the new RSM, and I think I have to also, I don't know, I don't know what kind of effect it will have in terms of designing the architecture with the new RSM. Like we had the old template of creating entity relationship diagram and validation and whatnot. So yeah, I'm also really interested to explore if we could still use the same mental model for that, or we have to shift a little bit to fit RSM.
So very briefly about this last point, because I think it's really important and interesting. Most of the designs, as far as design go, are going to be valid and efficient still, apart from the anchor first pattern, which you don't have to do now. And some, like in Holochain, validation rules define, can influence and can impact the data structures you have, right? So as validation is going to be a little bit different, that would impact some of the applications you have building. So for example, I have to rethink my mutual credit zone to see if the security model still holds. But in 80% of the cases, I don't think that's going to be the case. And we are going to be able to use the same mental model to think about all this.
Yeah. And yeah, just to add, I'm also really excited to dig deeper into the path and anchor. Yeah. I really want to understand how it works because I think that's going to greatly impact how we create semantics into our data model. So I'm very interested with that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And hooray for doing away with JSON because we were having a lot of trouble with double serializations and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Yeah, so last question of Martin. Is there anything to say about capability grants and RSM? Good point. I haven't talked about this. So yes, capabilities have been integrated from the get-go. So last version were kind of baked in at the end. And right now we have capabilities, implemented well and from the get-go. The interesting thing is that you don't define in the function, you can see in the past we did some function HC public or some function whatever capability, and in this version you don't do that because the capabilities can be dynamic. They are controlled by the entry, so you do commit capability grant, create capability grant, create capability claim, and different people can have different capabilities for the same function. So it's much more dynamic in that sense, because last time you were basically stuck. You define this function with this capability and you cannot change that. So right now you have much more flexibility on that. And on that note, send receive has changed now to remote call. So you don't do send and then deserialize the message and then pass the message to the function. No, it's a remote call. What it does is, okay, call this function on this zone for this other agent. So it's much more cleaner in that way. And that uses capabilities. You have to pass the capabilities there that say you can call this function or not. So a big improvement there.
So I think that's it.
Yeah, I think so. So thank you so much for joining in. I think it has been one of the most exciting weeks in a long time for me. I hope you are feeling at least some of the same energy to start building on this and share the journey with everyone. Thanks a lot for tuning in. The forum, I think, is the best way to get started with all of this. And the documentation is a little scattered around, but I think it's still manageable. I will be available in the forum, and different people that have been interacting around RSM will be available on the forum to answer questions. And also we have a way frequent contact with the core team, so we can answer any of your concerns that way. Apart from that, thank you so much for joining, and thank you, Ruta, for helping with the hosting. Do you want to say anything else, Ruta?
I think that's it. Just looking forward to what follows and further developments. And I think it's exciting time for all the ecosystem of Holochain for dev and non-dev and everything and everyone in between. Yeah, so thank you so much, Guillaume, for onboarding us.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and well, keep in touch. Have a great day and a great weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ciao, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Ciao. Bye.